Tonight's sleep story is about an entitled sibling, a stolen inheritance, and the quiet kind of revenge you can only pull off with a smile, a tape measure, and paperwork. I used to think the word home meant walls and a roof and the sound of a familiar floorboard creaking exactly 3 steps from the kitchen. Now I know it can also mean a person's last leverage, the one thing a greedy relative will fight for with clean hands and dirty intentions. The house was called Maple Grove, which sounds like a name you give a place you love. My mother named it when she was 22, newly married, and convinced that if you planted enough sugar maples along a gravel drive, the world would eventually start behaving itself. Maple Grove sat at the edge of town where the streetlights stopped and the trees began to lean in, like they were listening. 2 stories, faded clapboard, porch swing that whined when you sat down, and a kitchen window that framed the backyard like a painting. In the summer, my mother grew tomatoes and basil and did that thing where she'd hold a leaf to your nose and insist you breathe it in like medicine. When she died, the basil died too. We didn't talk about wills in my family. We talked around them the way we talked around my father's drinking, carefully, politely, as if the right silence could keep something from becoming real. My mother's illness gave us plenty of warning, and still we acted surprised at the funeral, as if grief was a guest who'd shown up uninvited. My brother Calvin cried in public the way he did everything else, loudly, efficiently, and just long enough to be seen. He was 8 years older than me and had always treated me like a spare key, useful when the front door stuck, forgettable when it opened easily. Calvin had the kind of charm that worked on cashiers and distant relatives and anyone who only knew him in short doses. If you spent a weekend with him, you'd start noticing the shape of his generosity. It always curved back toward him. The morning after the funeral, he stood in the kitchen at Maple Grove and made coffee like he owned the place. He wore a crisp black shirt with the sleeves rolled in that deliberate way men do when they want you to think they're the kind who aren't afraid of hard work. "I'll handle things," he said, like he was offering me a blanket. I was washing dishes nobody had really used. My hands moved on autopilot, sponge scraping a plate that had held nothing but condolence cookies. "Handle what?" Calvin opened a drawer, rummaged, then pulled out a pen as if he'd always known exactly where it was. "The estate, the paperwork, the bills, you don't want to drown in that." The word drown was a little cruel, considering, but he said it gently, like he was looking out for me. Calvin had mastered gentleness the way some people master knots. It looked soft until you struggled. "I can help," I said. He waved a hand. "You've got your job. You've got your little apartment. You're busy." My little apartment. I lived 30 minutes away in a 3rd-floor walk-up with radiators that clanked and neighbors who argued through the walls like it was a hobby. I'd been staying at Maple Grove for months to help Mom, sleeping in my old room, working remotely, telling myself it was temporary. Calvin lived 2 states away in a new build with an HOA and a driveway that never saw mud. He came home for weekends, brought takeout, took selfies with Mom when she was lucid enough to smile, then left again. In the kitchen light, with the coffee machine gurgling like it was trying to clear its throat, I watched him pick up the mail and sort it into piles. He did it quickly, like he'd rehearsed. "You should get some rest," he said. "I'll call the attorney." I didn't argue. Not then. Grief made me slow, and Calvin moved fast. I told myself that speed could be kindness. 2 days later, he invited me to meet him at the attorney's office. "Just to go over things," he said. "So we're all on the same page." The attorney was a pale man with careful hair and a desk that looked like it had never been truly used, just dusted. His nameplate said Henry Wolcott, and the kind of calm he radiated was either professionalism or avoidance. Calvin sat like he belonged there. I sat like I was waiting for a dentist. Henry folded his hands. "First, let me say I'm sorry for your loss. Your mother was a force." "She was," I said, and meant it. Calvin nodded gravely, then glanced at his watch as if grief was a meeting that had run over. Henry cleared his throat. "Your mother's will is straightforward. She left the majority of her liquid assets to be split evenly between you. Some personal items are listed specifically: jewelry, family photographs, a few heirlooms. He opened a folder and began reading as if he were reciting a weather report. The home at 14 Maple Road, known as Maple Grove. My stomach tightened. Is left to Calvin Brooks. I blinked, waiting for the rest of the sentence, like there would be a comma, like there would be an explanation, like there would be a correction. Calvin looked at me with a softness that almost convinced me he was sorry. "Mara," he said quietly. I didn't know. It was a good performance. The kind that would have fooled anyone who didn't know how often Calvin said, "I didn't know," right after he got what he wanted. Henry continued, "There is a note attached. Your mother requested that the home remain in the family and be maintained." Calvin's hand moved to his chest, his expression carefully arranged. "Of course." I heard my own voice, thin and strange. "There has to be—" "Why?" Henry shifted, uncomfortable. "Your mother wrote that Calvin has a family name to carry forward, and I'm her family too," I said, sharper than I intended. Calvin's eyes widened like he'd been slapped by the concept. "Mara, come on. You don't want to live here forever." I looked at him. At his expensive shoes, his calm posture, the way he held his pain like it was a prop. "I've been living here." "And you can keep visiting," he said, voice soothing. "It's not like I'm locking you out," but he was already, in his head, changing the locks. Henry slid a document toward me. "There's also a timeline. Probate is already in process, but once the house transfers, Calvin will be responsible for property taxes and maintenance. The will requests that you vacate within 60 days. Vacate. The word hit like cold water. Calvin leaned forward. "I'll help you move," he said, and the phrase landed with the weight of a threat wrapped in ribbon. "I should tell you something about me. I am not a screamer. I am not a table flipper. I'm the person who steadies the tray when someone bumps it and smiles like it didn't matter. People mistake that for weakness, but calm is not surrender. Calm is sometimes a decision you make so you can see clearly." I walked out of Henry's office with my hands clenched so tight my nails left crescents in my palms. Calvin followed, talking in that low, reasonable voice he used when he wanted to sound like the hero in someone else's story. "We'll do this easy," he said. "No drama. Mom wouldn't want drama. Mom wouldn't want betrayal either," I thought, but I didn't say it. I drove back to Maple Grove and sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the house like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. Inside, everything smelled like dust and flowers and the faint ghost of basil. My mother's cardigan still hung on the back of the kitchen chair. I picked it up and pressed it to my face. It smelled like her soap and the life she'd lived quietly, without asking anyone's permission. Calvin came in behind me. "Hey," he said softly. "I know this is hard." I kept my voice steady. "Did you talk to her about it?" He hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second, then shook his head. "No, she probably just thought—" "That you deserved it?" I asked. His mouth tightened. "That I could keep it in the family. You've got your independence, Mara. I've got—" "What?" I turned to face him. "What do you have that I don't?" He smiled like he was trying to be patient with a child. "Responsibilities." And there it was, Calvin's favorite word. Responsibilities. It was how he justified everything. He wasn't selfish, he was responsible. He wasn't greedy, he was planning ahead. He wasn't pushing me out, he was making hard choices. The thing about Calvin is he never took what he wanted with a snarl. He took it with a handshake. I swallowed. I forced my shoulders to relax. I forced my face into something polite. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "Okay." I nodded once. "If Mom wanted you to have it, you can have it." Calvin exhaled, relief slipping through his posture like he'd been holding his breath. "Thank you," he said, and I could tell he meant thank you for making this easier for him. I walked past him and opened the pantry because I needed something to do with my hands. I stared at the shelves of canned soup and flour and my mother's neat labels. I let myself feel the ache deep and private. Behind me, Calvin said, "We'll make it a fresh start. I'll fix it up. Make it nice." "It's already nice," I said quietly. He didn't hear me, or pretended not to. That night, I lay in my childhood bed and listened to the house settle. There were familiar noises, wood contracting, pipes ticking, the wind pressing against the siding like a curious palm. Maple Grove had always felt alive to me, like it was made of memory as much as lumber, and now it had been willed to someone who only saw it as a prize. At 3 a.m, I got up and walked the halls barefoot. I stopped in the living room where my mother's favorite lamp still stood, the one with the stained glass shade that threw warm colors on the walls. I thought of Calvin moving his furniture in, replacing her things, painting over the scuffs she'd made with her own hands. I imagined him turning Maple Grove into a showroom version of a home, stripping out every softness that didn't fit his aesthetic. I stood in the dim light and made myself a promise. If Calvin wanted Maple Grove, he could have it. But he wasn't going to enjoy it, not in any way that could get me arrested, not in any way that would count as damage, not in any way a judge could point to and call criminal. I would be helpful, I would be kind, I would be generous, and I would give him a house that was, on paper, improved, and in reality, maddening. The next morning, Calvin made pancakes like he was hosting a brunch. He whistled while he cooked. He talked about contractors and paint colors, about how the porch needed modernizing. I poured coffee and nodded. I smiled at the right moments. I watched him. Calvin liked winning most when he felt like he'd earned it. He didn't just want the house. He wanted my cooperation. He wanted to be able to tell people, with that humble tilt of his head, that Mara took it so well, she was so mature about it, he was so grateful we handled it like adults. So I gave him exactly what he wanted. "I've been thinking," I said, cutting my pancake carefully. "If you're going to fix it up, I can start on some little improvements before I go, like a parting gift." Calvin's fork paused midair. "You'd do that?" I smiled. "Of course. Mom would want it taken care of. And I did live here for a long time." His expression softened into something that looked like affection, but I recognized it as triumph. "That's really decent of you, Mara." Decent. He said it like it was a compliment. Like decency was my defining feature and not a choice I made every day to keep from becoming someone like him. "What kind of improvements?" he asked. "Small things," I said lightly. "Comfort upgrades, convenience, maybe a little smart home stuff, nothing crazy." Calvin loved anything that sounded modern and impressive. He loved being able to say words like integrated and automated. I watched his eyes brighten. "Sure," he said. "Go for it. Just keep receipts. We can count it against your share if you want." My smile didn't waver. "No need." He relaxed, and I saw it. The moment he decided I was harmless, I spent the next week doing exactly what I'd promised, renovating. If you'd walked through Maple Grove then, you would have thought I was a saint. I scrubbed. I patched little nail holes. I polished the hardwood until it shone. I replaced old outlet covers with clean new ones, bright white and tidy. I oiled hinges, fixed a sticky window latch, tightened loose doorknobs. Calvin came by every few days, breezing in with coffee and suggestions and that smug sense of ownership blooming behind his eyes. He'd clap me on the shoulder like we were teammates. "You're really making it shine," he'd say. "I'm glad," I'd reply warmly. "It's the least I can do." Then, once the obvious fixes were done, once I'd established the image of helpfulness, I began the upgrades that looked like gifts but functioned like puzzles. First, the lighting. Maple Grove had old-fashioned switches. Simple, reliable, flip, light. I replaced them with smart switches and smart bulbs, all properly installed, all up to code, all from reputable brands that came in boxes with reassuring warranty information. I set up a hub. I labeled everything neatly. Then I created automations. It's amazing what you can do with convenience if you understand how annoying convenience becomes when it stops obeying instinct. The kitchen lights? They still turned on from the switch, but only after a delay, just long enough to make you wonder if the bulb had burned out, long enough that you'd flip it twice, then 3 times, then start muttering under your breath when suddenly the lights came on like nothing had happened. The hallway lights? Motion activated. with a sensitivity setting that made them turn on for raccoons outside the window at 2 in the morning and ignore actual humans if they walked too slowly. The living room lamp? Voice-controlled, but it required the specific phrase, "living room lamp, please," because I'd named it that. Polite, helpful, a tiny humiliation every time you wanted light. And the pièce de résistance, the dishwasher plug. I installed a smart plug for energy monitoring. Perfectly legitimate, the kind of thing a green-minded homeowner would love. I left the app login information in a neat little folder labeled Smart Home Info, along with QR codes and printed instructions. Then I linked the main overhead lights, just those, not emergency lighting, nothing unsafe, to an automation routine called Energy Saver. When the dishwasher ran, the lights worked normally. When the dishwasher did not run, the lights still worked, but only if you turned them on, turned them off, and turned them on again within 7 seconds. Like you were entering a cheat code. It wasn't sabotage, it was a feature. The kind of feature you could fix if you knew what you were doing. The kind of feature that would make Calvin, who considered himself a natural genius, refuse to call for help for. Far longer than was reasonable. Next, the doors. I didn't change locks. I didn't damage frames. I simply replaced several interior doorknobs with ones that looked identical but had reversed latches. They were legal. They were installed correctly. They worked perfectly. Once you learned their personality, one bathroom door needed to be lifted slightly as you turned the knob. Another needed a firm push rather than a pull, despite the direction of the swing. It was the kind of thing you could chalk up to an old house, the kind of thing that made visitors say, laughing, "Oh, this door is quirky," while Calvin stood nearby pretending it was charming and not slowly driving him insane. Then, the thermostat. Maple Grove had an old dial thermostat that my mother kept slightly too warm. I replaced it with a sleek digital one designed for efficiency. Again, perfectly normal. I even left the manual. I set it to Eco Schedule and created a program that dropped the temperature by 4 degrees at precisely 2:17 a.m. every night, then warmed back up by 3:02. Not enough to be dangerous, just enough to wake someone who liked to sleep comfortable, just enough to create a pattern of mild discomfort that was hard to explain, because who wakes up at 2:17 and looks at the clock and thinks, "This is a conspiracy?" I did it with kindness, with a smile. With a folder full of instructions. Calvin stopped by one afternoon and found me on a ladder, replacing a ceiling vent. "Wow," he said, impressed. "You're really going all out." I climbed down carefully, holding the vent cover like it was precious. "It's important," I said. "This place deserves care." He looked around at the bright outlet covers, the polished floors, the fresh caulk around the bathtub. "I'll admit," he said, voice softening, "I didn't expect you to be so cool about all this." I met his eyes and let my expression stay gentle. "Why wouldn't I be?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Some people get bitter." I smiled. "I'm not some people." Calvin laughed, relieved. "That's why you're a good person, Mara." Good. Yes, I thought. I am. I'm good enough to keep my hands clean while I rearrange your life into something you can't get comfortable in. The weeks moved forward. I packed my things slowly, methodically, so Calvin couldn't accuse me of dragging my feet. I labeled boxes. I donated items. I left behind anything that felt like it belonged to the house more than it belonged to me. Old blankets, kitchen utensils, the worn-out book of recipes my mother had annotated. I also left behind gifts. A set of self-closing cabinet hinges in the kitchen, installed properly, that made every cabinet door drift shut with a slow, patient inevitability. At first, it seemed luxurious. Then it became maddening, because you couldn't just toss a cabinet closed with your hip while cooking. You had to wait for it to finish its slow-motion journey, as if the house itself insisted on being obeyed. A new shower head with multiple settings that reset itself to mist every single time the water turned off. Mist, gentle, calm, like being breathed on by a bored ghost. A touchless kitchen faucet, great for hygiene, also so sensitive it turned on if you waved your hands too enthusiastically while talking, and because Calvin loved appearances, I made sure everything looked upscale. Everything came with a little brochure. Everything had a brand name he could brag about. He thanked me constantly. "You're saving me so much work," he said. "I'm happy to," I replied. "Mom would be proud," he said. That one stung. I swallowed it down and kept smiling. On my last weekend at Maple Grove, Calvin hosted a small family dinner. It was really a victory lap. He invited our Aunt Denise, who loved gossip and casseroles, and our cousin Mark, who always looked uncomfortable in any room that contained emotions. Calvin stood at the head of the dining table like he was presiding over a court. "To Mom," he said, raising his glass, "and to family, and to moving forward." Everyone murmured assent. Aunt Denise dabbed at her eyes. "Your mother would be so happy you're keeping the house," she said to Calvin. He smiled modestly. "It's what she wanted." Denise turned to me. "And you, sweetheart, you're taking it so well. You always were the easy one. The easy one." I heard it like a label slapped on my forehead at birth. I smiled. "I'm just glad it's staying in the family." Calvin's gaze flickered to me, approving. After dinner, while they lingered over dessert, Calvin walked guests through the house like a realtor. "Look at these new switches," he said, flicking one. The light didn't come on immediately. Calvin frowned, flicked it again. Still nothing. Then, with perfect timing, the light bloomed overhead. "Oh," Denise said. "Fancy." "Smart," Calvin said, laughing. "It's all smart now." Mark peered at the thermostat. "That looks complicated." Calvin clapped him on the shoulder. "It's easy. Mara set it up." I stood in the doorway, hands folded, expression mild. The helpful sister, the gracious loser. Calvin walked them into the kitchen. "And this," he said, waving at the dishwasher, "is energy efficient." "Nice," Denise said. Calvin flipped on the kitchen light. It came on, because earlier I'd started the dishwasher and left it running quietly. Calvin didn't notice. Not yet. That night, once everyone had left and Calvin had gone to his hotel, because he still didn't technically live at Maple Grove until the transfer finalized, I sat alone in the living room and let my mask slip, just a little. I stared at the stained glass lamp, at the familiar furniture, at the walls that had watched me grow up. Grief sat beside me like a quiet animal, heavy and loyal. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not sure if I was saying it to my mother or the house. I wasn't destroying Maple Grove. I wasn't harming it. I was changing its temperament, turning it from a warm embrace into a polite handshake that lasted too long. In the morning, I left. I didn't slam doors. I didn't cry in front of Calvin. I loaded my car with the last of my boxes and swept the porch like a good daughter. Calvin arrived while I was tying down a tarp. "Wow," he said, leaning against the porch railing. "You really did it." I smiled up at him. "Did what?" "Moved out without a fight." I kept my voice light. "Why would I fight?" He watched me for a moment, searching for something. Anger, bitterness, a crack. He didn't find it. He stepped forward and pulled me into a hug that lasted a second too long, the way his hugs always did, like they were meant for an audience. "You'll be okay," he said, voice low. "I know," I replied. "So will you." He laughed. "I'm not worried about me." I looked at him, at the house behind him, at the maples lining the drive like witnesses. "You should take good care of her," I said softly. His smile widened. "I will." I drove away with my hands steady on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, Maple Grove shrank, white and quiet behind the trees, like it was holding its breath. For the first few days, Calvin sent me cheerful texts, updates, photos, new couch in the living room, paint samples on the wall, a selfie on the porch with a caption, "Keeping it in the family." I responded with thumbs-up emojis and polite words. I congratulated him. I offered tips. I played my part so well I almost believed it. Then, 10 days after I moved out, he called. His voice was strained, but he tried to keep it casual. "Hey, quick question." "Sure," I said, sitting on my apartment floor surrounded by unpacked boxes. These lights, he said. They're weird. I let a beat pass, as if thinking. Weird how? Like, sometimes they lag. He laughed, forced. It's fine. Probably just the bulbs warming up or whatever. Might be the hub sinking, I said gently. Did you follow the instruction sheet? Yeah, he snapped, then immediately softened. I mean, yes, of course. Sometimes smart homes take a little getting used to, I said, my voice full of sympathy. You'll get the hang of it. He exhaled, relieved I wasn't mocking him. Right. And the dishwasher, I added casually. Is it running okay? Yeah, he said, suspicious. Why? No reason, I said warmly, just making sure everything's smooth. He hesitated. It's fine. Good, I said. Call me if you need anything. He hung up, and I smiled into the quiet of my small apartment, the kind of smile you'd never show a priest. 3 days later, he called again. Okay, he said immediately, and I could hear the edge in his voice. This is ridiculous. I made my tone concerned. What's wrong? The hallway lights come on at night, he hissed. Like, randomly. I was in bed and they just, boom, like someone's walking around. Motion sensors, I said, gentle as a lullaby. They're for safety. There was nobody, he said. Maybe a cat outside the window, I offered. We don't have cats, he snapped. Maybe the house does, I said, and let myself sound like I was joking. Old houses are quirky, Calvin. Silence. Then, with effort, he laughed. Yeah, quirky. I could almost see him pressing his lips together, refusing to sound angry, because if he sounded angry, he'd be admitting that I, the easy one, had gotten under his skin. How do I adjust them? He asked. Oh, it's simple, I said. There's a sensitivity setting. You just go into the app and… The app logged me out, he interrupted. It says I need a 2-factor code. I blinked slowly, like I was surprised. Oh, that's probably because the account is still registered to my phone number. For security. For security, he repeated, tight. I can transfer it to you, I said quickly, helpful. No problem. Do that, he said, relief and irritation tangling together. Of course, I said. Send me a screenshot. He did. I guided him through steps, patient and kind, like a tech support agent who genuinely cared about his well-being. I could feel him relaxing as we talked, slipping back into the comfort of thinking I was harmless. When we finished, he said, almost sheepish, Thanks. Any time, I replied. After I hung up, I waited 10 minutes, then logged into the hub again. I didn't lock him out. That would be too obvious, too mean, too easily labeled as malicious. I simply added one more convenience routine, a bedtime routine called Goodnight Maple. At 2:17 a.m., the thermostat would dip. The hallway lights would blink once, just once, like a sleepy eye opening and closing. The living room lamp would glow faintly for 5 minutes, then fade. Not enough to call an electrician over. Enough to plant a seed, enough to make Calvin start sleeping lightly, enough to make him begin to feel in his bones that the house had moods now, and he didn't know how to predict them. One evening in late autumn, Aunt Denise called me. Mara, she said, voice bright with gossip. How are you, sweetheart? I'm okay, I said. How's Calvin? Oh, he's loving the house, she said, then lowered her voice. Well, loving it. Mostly. I leaned back against my couch. Mostly? Denise made a little tisk sound. He says it's haunted. I let my face stay neutral even though my mouth wanted to smile. Haunted? He won't say haunted, Denise corrected, delighted. He says electrical anomalies, like he's on a science show, but he's jumpy. He says lights come on, temperature changes, the kitchen faucet turns on by itself. I installed touchless, I said calmly. It's probably just sensitive. Oh, I know, Denise said, though I could tell she didn't. I told him to call an electrician. He said he did, but the electrician couldn't find anything wrong. I hummed sympathetically. And, Denise added, savoring it, He says the cabinets close too slow. He gets mad like it's personal. I pictured Calvin standing in the kitchen, arms full of groceries, waiting for a cabinet door to finish its slow, soft shut. I pictured him glaring at it like it was mocking him. I kept my voice sweet. It's self-closing. It's better for the hinges. Well, Denise said, he's not sleeping much. He says he hears clicking. I almost laughed. The clicking was just the smart switches relaying, a tiny mechanical sound. Completely normal. Completely unsettling if you were already on edge. Maybe he's stressed, I offered. Denise sighed. He's got a lot on his plate. Property taxes, utilities. He didn't realize how expensive it is. That's why Mom wanted it maintained, I said softly. Yes, Denise said, then brightened again. Anyway, I just wanted to check on you. You're still okay with all of it? The question held a hidden hunger. People loved a good family feud. They loved knowing who cried, who screamed, who threw a vase. I'm okay, I said. It's his house now. Denise sounded almost disappointed. You're so strong, Mara. Strong, easy, decent. The words people used when they wanted you to stay quiet. When I hung up, I sat in my apartment and listened to the city noises outside. Cars, distant voices, a siren that rose and fell like a sigh. I didn't feel joy exactly. Revenge wasn't a sugar rush. It was a slow exhale, a loosening of something tight inside me. Calvin had taken the house, so I'd given him the experience of owning it. A month later, he called again, and this time he didn't bother pretending it was casual. Mara, he said, voice low, I need you to tell me what you did. I made my tone surprised. Did? Don't, he snapped. Don't play dumb. I sat down at my kitchen table, folding my hands like I was praying. Calvin, what's going on? The lights, he said. They're tied to something. I know they are. I blinked slowly, as if processing. Tied? He exhaled hard. The overhead kitchen lights only behave when the dishwasher runs. There was the pivot beginning, right there in his voice, the first crack in his certainty. The moment he realized the house was not simply quirky, it was trained. I let silence stretch, the way my mother used to when she wanted someone to hear themselves. Well, I said finally carefully, that doesn't sound right. It's happening, he insisted. If the dishwasher is off, I flip the switch and nothing. Then I run the dishwasher and suddenly the lights work like normal. Explain that. It might be the circuit load, I said gently. Old wiring can be finicky. I had an electrician here, he said. Twice. He says the wiring is fine. That's good, I said, soothing. So maybe it's the hub. He hesitated. The hub? Yes, I said. Smart homes are layered. Sometimes routines interact. He swallowed, and I could practically hear him hating the fact that he needed me. Can you fix it? Of course, I said, kind as honey. I'll come by this weekend. He exhaled, relief mixing with suspicion. Just fix it. I will, I promised. No problem at all. When I arrived at Maple Grove on Saturday, Calvin met me on the porch with dark circles under his eyes. He looked thinner, tense. The house behind him looked the same. Fresh paint samples now chosen, new curtains hanging, the porch swing replaced with a stiff bench that matched his taste, but the air felt different, like the house was aware of him now. Hey, I said brightly, stepping up with a small toolbox I didn't really need. Calvin didn't smile. Just come in. Inside, I noticed small signs of frustration. A cabinet door left half open like he'd gotten tired of waiting, a lamp unplugged, a sticky note on the thermostat that read, "Stop changing." How have you been? I asked, voice warm, as if we were two siblings catching up over coffee. He glared. Fine, I nodded sympathetically. Moving is stressful, and grieving. It's a lot at once. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Grief was his shield when he needed one. I walked through the house slowly, like I was admiring it, like I wasn't listening for the faint click of relays, the hum of the hub tucked discreetly near the router. Calvin followed me, arms crossed. So? I'll take a look, I said. I opened the folder I'd left, Smart Home Info, and flipped through the pages like I was reviewing instructions I'd never written. "Okay," I murmured. "Let's see." Calvin watched, impatient. "Just turn it off." "Turn what off?" I asked, gentle. "All of it," he snapped. "The smart stuff, the routines. I want normal lights." I looked at him with mild concern. "Are you sure? You were excited about the smart upgrades." "I was excited about my lights turning on when I flip a switch," he said, voice rising. I softened. "Okay, we can simplify." He exhaled, shoulders dropping slightly. He wanted to believe I was here to help. He wanted to believe I was still the easy one. I went to the hub and logged in. Calvin hovered. "You're still on my account," I said lightly. "See? That's probably the issue." He frowned. "Why would it be on your account?" "Because I set it up while I lived here," I said, as if it were obvious. "But it's okay. I'll transfer everything." He muttered something under his breath that might have been thank you, or might have been a curse. I clicked through screens slowly, narrating what I was doing in a soothing, helpful voice. "Okay, so here are the routines. Energy saver, nightlight, Goodnight Maple." Calvin's head snapped up. "Goodnight Maple." "It's just a name," I said, calm. "You can rename it." "Why is there a routine called Goodnight Maple?" he demanded. I smiled, soft. "Because I thought it was cute, like saying goodnight to the house. Mom used to—" "Delete it," he said. I nodded. "Sure," I deleted it. Or rather, I removed the schedule trigger. A small difference, the kind that mattered. I went through and simplified the automations. I fixed the dishwasher link by making it less obvious. The lights would now behave most of the time, except in one specific scenario Calvin would absolutely encounter. When he hosted guests and ran the dishwasher afterward, the dining room lights would begin to dim and brighten like a slow heartbeat, responding to the machine's energy draw. Not dangerous, not illegal, just embarrassing. Calvin watched my hands, suspicious. "You're sure it's gone?" "It's better," I promised. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't know enough to argue specifics. Calvin's ego wouldn't allow him to admit he didn't understand the system, so he settled for scowling and letting me save him. When I finished, I turned to him and smiled. "There," I said. "Should be much more normal now." He stared at me, searching my face. "Why would you do any of that in the first place?" I blinked slowly, like the question surprised me. "Do what?" "The linking," he said, voice tight. "The routines." I tilted my head, innocent. "It's smart home optimization. Convenience." He looked at me like he didn't know whether to believe me or accuse me. In that moment, I saw something rare on Calvin's face. Doubt. Not doubt in me. Doubt in himself. Because the house had become something he couldn't control. And Calvin's greatest fear wasn't being disliked, it was being powerless. He finally looked away. "Whatever," he muttered. "Thanks." "Of course," I said warmly. "I want you to be comfortable here." He flinched, just slightly, as if the word comfortable had teeth. Before I left, I walked out to the front yard and stood at the end of the driveway. The gravel met the road in a neat fan shape. My mother used to stand right here when the school bus dropped me off, waving like I might forget who loved me if she didn't remind me. I stared down at the edge where gravel met asphalt, and I noticed something I hadn't seen before because I'd never had reason to. A thin strip of land, maybe 3 feet deep, stretching along the road, didn't match the rest of the property. The grass there grew differently, patchier, like it belonged to someone who didn't care about it. The mailbox sat on it. It was small, negligible, the kind of detail you'd ignore your whole life unless you suddenly needed to know exactly where ownership began and ended. Calvin came out behind me. "You okay?" I turned, smiling. "Just remembering Mom." He softened, momentarily human. "Yeah." I nodded toward the edge of the driveway. "Hey," I said casually, "do you know where the property line is here?" Calvin frowned. "What?" "The boundary," I said light. "I was just thinking." If you ever widen the drive, you'll want to be sure you're staying on your land, Calvin shrugged. It's our land. It's always been. I nodded, polite. Right. But my eyes stayed on that strip. That night, back in my apartment, I pulled up the county GIS map online. I zoomed in. I toggled layers. Parcel lines appeared in bright, precise colors. And there it was. Maple Grove's parcel ended a few feet short of the road. The driveway, the part that met the street, the part everyone used without thinking, crossed over a separate parcel. A sliver, a spite strip waiting to happen. It wasn't owned by Calvin. It wasn't owned by me. It belonged to an elderly woman named Edith Larkin, who lived in a small ranch house down the road and had apparently been paying taxes on that strip for decades without anyone noticing. I stared at the screen, my heart beating slow and steady. The next day, I went to see Edith. Her house smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. She opened the door cautiously, squinting at me through thick glasses. Yes? I smiled warmly. Hi, Ms. Larkin. My name is Mara Brooks. I grew up at Maple Grove. Her expression shifted. Oh, the White House. Yes, I said gently. I'm sorry to bother you. I had a question about your property line. She blinked. My property line? I pulled out printed maps, neat and clear. According to the parcel map, you own a small strip of land by the road, right where the driveway meets Maple Road. Edith frowned, took the paper, and studied it like it was a crossword. Well, I'll be, she murmured. So I do. You've been paying taxes on it, I said softly. She huffed. Taxes on land I don't even use. I nodded sympathetically. I know, it's not fair. Edith looked up sharply. Why are you asking? I took a breath and let my face show a hint of sadness. My brother inherited the house. He's moving in, and I'm worried he might try to expand or change the driveway, and I don't want you to get taken advantage of. Edith's eyes narrowed. Taken advantage of? Yes, I said. Some people assume little strips like that don't matter. Edith's mouth tightened. People assume a lot. I hesitated, like the idea was just occurring to me. If you ever wanted to sell it, so you wouldn't have to keep paying taxes on it, I might be interested. Edith stared at me. You'd buy that? It's small, I said gently, but it matters, and I'd rather it belong to someone who respects you. She studied my face for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Come in, she said. Let's talk. We talked for an hour. Edith was sharper than she looked. She'd been a legal secretary once. She understood paperwork. She understood people. When I offered her a fair price, not high, but respectful, and promised to cover closing costs, her eyes softened. You're not doing this for yourself, she said finally. I smiled, small and honest. Not exactly, Edith snorted. Good, because if you were, I'd charge you double. I laughed softly. Fair. 2 weeks later, I owned the strip of land directly in front of Calvin's driveway, 3 feet deep, long enough to matter. The deed was clean. The sale was legal. The taxes were mine. And Calvin didn't know. Not yet. I stood on that strip one cold morning with my hands in my coat pockets, looking at the mouth of the driveway where gravel met my grass. I could have built a fence, a simple, code-compliant fence with a permit and proper setbacks. But simple didn't fit the moment. Calvin wanted Maple Grove as a trophy. He wanted neighbors to drive by and see him standing on the porch like a man who'd inherited not just property but legacy. So I decided to give him a view. Something unforgettable, something that would make every arrival and departure an experience. I started calling around for local artists. I asked about materials that could withstand winter. I asked about foundations and zoning and maximum height allowances. I learned the rules the way Calvin never did, with patience. And when I finally found the right person, a metalworker who did large-scale yard sculptures, I described what I wanted with the calm precision of someone ordering a wedding cake. I want it to be meaningful, I said. The metalworker raised an eyebrow. Meaningful how? I smiled. Like gratitude, I said. Like family. Like legacy. He nodded slowly, already imagining tasteful things. I leaned in slightly, my voice still gentle. But also, I added, I want it to be impossible to ignore. He laughed. You want a statement? Yes, I said. A statement. He pulled out a sketchpad. What are we talking? Abstract? Figurative? I looked past him in my mind at Calvin's face when he saw it. Figurative, I said softly. And big. He grinned. Big I can do. I handed him the parcel map and pointed. It goes here, I said. Right in front, where everyone can see it, where it's completely within my property line. He whistled. That's bold. I smiled, kind and calm. I'm just taking care of what's mine. He nodded, and I could tell he liked me. People always did at first, because I sounded reasonable, because I smiled, because I didn't look like revenge. By the time the permits cleared, Calvin started texting me again, cheerful updates, complaints disguised as jokes. The thermostat is possessed LOL. Do you know why the faucet hates me? This house is trying to humble me, I replied with sympathetic emojis and helpful suggestions. Try resetting the sensor, maybe update the firmware. Old houses, right? He never suspected I was doing anything but trying to be a good sister. Then, one afternoon, he called, voice bright with forced friendliness. Hey, random question. Sure, I said, standing at my window watching snow begin to fall. Did you ever talk to the neighbor down the road? Edith Larkin? I kept my voice steady. Edith? Why? He hesitated. I got a letter. Something about boundary clarification. My heart beat once, slow and satisfied. Oh, I said lightly. That. What do you mean, that? He asked, suddenly sharp. I let my tone stay calm. Helpful. I just noticed on the parcel map that the driveway edge wasn't fully on your land. I didn't want you to accidentally run into an issue if you ever did work there, so I looked into it. Calvin's voice rose. You looked into it? Yes, I said gently. It's good to know these things. Property is complicated. Silence. Then, carefully. And, I said, as if it were no big deal at all. Edith was tired of paying taxes on that strip, so I bought it. The line went quiet in a way that felt like someone stepping too close to a cliff. You bought it? Calvin repeated very softly. Yes, I said. Legally. Clean sale. It's mine now. He inhaled, and I could hear him trying to control his breathing like he was in a meeting. Why would you do that? I let myself sound surprised. Because it was available. That strip is in front of my driveway, he said, voice tight, like each word hurt. Yes, I agreed pleasantly. Isn't that interesting? None of us noticed for years. Calvin's voice turned dangerous, low. Mara, what are you planning? I laughed softly like he was being silly. Planning? Nothing. I just thought it was smart. He exhaled hard. You can't block my driveway. I wouldn't, I said, gentle as a lullaby. I'd never do anything like that. He paused, and I heard the shift, the pivot, fully formed now. The moment Calvin realized he hadn't won the way he thought he'd won. The moment he realized the game hadn't ended when he got the deed to the house. It had just changed fields. You're lying, he whispered. I kept my voice warm. Calvin, I'm your sister. Silence. Then, strained. What are you doing on that land? Oh, I said brightly. I'm putting up a little installation, just something tasteful. You'll love it. His voice cracked. Mara? Don't worry, I said, sweet. It's totally legal, permitted, and I'll make sure it's memorable. He started to speak, but I cut in gently, like a nurse soothing a patient. I have to go, I said. But hey, try to get some sleep, okay? You sound stressed. I hung up before he could find the right words. Outside my window, the snow thickened, softening the world. And down the road, at Maple Grove, Calvin had finally met a problem he couldn't charm, couldn't buy off, couldn't out-talk, because the problem was me, smiling politely, holding a deed. And the installation? It was scheduled for delivery in 3 days. The third day arrived with a sky the color of wet concrete and snow that couldn't decide whether it wanted to fall or just threaten. I drove out to Maple Road early, not because I was eager to see Calvin, but because I wanted to be there before I could stage manage the moment. My little strip of land didn't look like much on its own. 3 feet deep, a neat ribbon between the road and the start of the gravel. In summer, it was just grass and a mailbox. In winter, it was a pale crust of frozen earth with tire tracks pressed into it like fingerprints. Calvin's fingerprints, specifically. I parked down the road by Edith Larkin's house because I wasn't going to roll up like a villain in a movie. Revenge was best delivered with the energy of someone arriving to help. Edith stood at her window when I knocked. She opened the door like she was expecting a casserole or a subpoena. "You're early," she said. "I like to be," I replied. Her eyes narrowed. "For someone who just wanted to make sure I didn't get taken advantage of, you've got a lot of logistics." I smiled. "I learned from the best." Edith snorted, and that might have been a laugh. She let me stand in her warm living room for a minute while I watched the road through her lace curtains. "Do you think he knows?" she asked. "He knows I bought it," I said. "He doesn't know what's coming." Edith sipped her tea. "Men like that always think they know. It's their favorite hobby." Outside, a truck turned onto Maple Road. Not the delivery truck yet, just a neighbor. Edith and I both watched it like it mattered. Then, at exactly 9:06 a.m., the flatbed arrived. It wasn't subtle. A long trailer, hazard lights blinking, rolling slow as if it were escorting something important. 2 workers in reflective jackets, boots crunching on the shoulder, and strapped down with thick black straps, wrapped in weatherproof tarp. My installation. Edith leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Oh my." "Permitted," I murmured. "Oh, I don't doubt that," she said, sounding delighted. "But permitted doesn't mean it isn't going to cause a heart condition." The workers climbed down and started unfastening straps. The tarp shifted, and a hint of painted metal showed through, an alarming shade of glossy, cheerful. Edith squinted. "Is that pink?" I kept my voice soft. "Tasteful is subjective." The trailer's engine idled, rumbling like a throat clearing. Snow drifted down in slow, lazy flakes, collecting on the tarp like powdered sugar, and then Calvin's front door opened. He came out too fast, like he'd been waiting behind the curtain. He wore a winter coat that looked expensive and new, and even from this distance I could see he'd tried to dress for authority. Dark jeans, boots, a tight jaw. He marched down the driveway toward the road, toward my land, toward the flatbed. I slipped out of Edith's house and walked down the shoulder with my hands in my coat pockets, my posture relaxed, not sneaky, not rushed, just present. Calvin saw me halfway there. His eyes locked on mine, and the expression on his face wasn't anger yet. It was disbelief, like he still expected the universe to correct itself and put him back in charge. "What is this?" he demanded before I even reached him. I smiled. "Good morning." "Don't," he snapped. Then he remembered he had an audience, workers, neighbors potentially watching, and lowered his voice into that tight, reasonable register he favored. "Mara, what is this?" "It's my installation," I said, warm as tea. "On my property." He spun toward the workers. "Hey, do you have a permit for this?" One of them lifted a clipboard. "Yep, right here. We're good." Calvin's nostrils flared. He turned back to me like I was a crossword he couldn't solve. "You're putting something—" "Yes," I said. "Isn't it nice? Right at the entrance. Very welcoming." His jaw worked. "That's my driveway." I tilted my head. "Actually, it's yours, the boundary line." He stared at me with a look that tried to bully the facts into changing. "I'm going to call my lawyer," he said. "I already spoke to one," I replied pleasantly. That stopped him, just for a beat. Calvin hated surprises, especially legal ones. He recovered quickly, of course. "You can't block access to my home," he said, voice sharpening. "I'm not blocking access," I said, still smiling. "I'm improving the frontage of my land." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Improving." "Mm-hmm." I nodded toward the tarp. "It's art." He looked like he wanted to swear, but the workers were watching, so he did what Calvin always did when he wanted to hurt someone in public without being obvious. He smiled. It was a thin smile, the kind that showed teeth but not warmth. "You're doing this because you're upset," he said softly, like he was talking to a child. I smiled back, kinder. "No, I'm doing this because I'm practical." His eyes narrowed. "Practical. Edith was paying taxes on land she didn't use," I said. "Now I'm paying taxes, so I'm going to use it." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're trying to punish me." I kept my tone gentle. "Calvin, it's not personal." His laugh this time was almost a bark. "Not personal." I glanced toward the tarp again, as if admiring it. "Trust me," I said calmly. "If I were trying to punish you, you'd know." His face twitched. It was the smallest crack, an involuntary flicker of worry, before he snapped the mask back into place. Behind him, the workers started peeling away the tarp. A glossy metal shape emerged in pieces. A base, a towering figure, bright paint and polished steel. Something large enough that the flatbed suddenly looked too small to contain it. Edith, standing a little behind me now on the shoulder like she'd come out for the show, whispered, "Oh my." Calvin turned, and I watched the exact moment his brain tried to label what he was seeing and failed. The installation was, technically, beautifully made. It was also hideous. A 10-foot-tall sculpture of two hands shaking, not elegant hands, not simplified, tasteful shapes. These hands were exaggerated, cartoonish, veins and knuckles rendered in gleaming metal. One wrist wore what looked like a chunky gold watch, the other wore a delicate bracelet of pastel beads, and the faces, oh yes, there were faces. Because the metalworker, bless him, had offered to personalize it. He'd asked if I wanted initials engraved. I'd said no. I'd asked for something more symbolic. So perched atop the handshake, like a crown, like a monument, was a grotesquely cheerful, oversized, smiling face split down the middle. Half was a businessman grin, half was a sweet, innocent smile. Above it all, arcing in shiny cursive metal, were the words, "Calvin stared at it, as if it had grown out of the earth on its own." One of the workers, proud, said, "This is a nice piece, real solid." Calvin's voice came out thin. "You put words." I beamed. "Inspiring, right?" Edith made a sound that might have been choking back laughter. She covered it with a cough. Calvin turned to me slowly, like a man in a horror movie realizing the thing behind him is closer than he thought. "Take it down," I blinked. "Why would I do that?" "It's—" He started, then stopped because he couldn't say ugly without sounding petty. He tried again, choosing a more defensible argument. "It's obstructing." "It's entirely on my parcel," I said, and pulled a folded, laminated map from my coat pocket like a prepared kindergarten teacher. "See? Boundary line. Clear as day." His eyes flicked down, his hands clenched. "You planned this," he said, voice trembling now with a fury he couldn't fully control. I softened my expression. "Calvin, you inherited a house. You should be happy." He stepped forward again, too close, and hissed so only I could hear, "I'm going to make your life hell." I kept my voice quiet and calm. "That seems like a lot of effort." His eyes flashed. "Move it." "I can't," I said gently. "It's bolted to the foundation." His mouth opened, then shut, like he couldn't find a sentence that would reverse reality. The workers began unloading the base. Calvin whirled on them. "Stop! You can't put that there!" The one with the clipboard didn't even look up. "Ma'am's got the permit." Calvin's head snapped toward me at the word, like being identified as someone else's subordinate in this moment was an extra insult. I smiled at the worker. "Thank you." Calvin's face reddened. "She's my sister," he said, as if that should mean something to strangers. The worker shrugged. Still her land. And that, right there, was the first true victory of the day. Not the sculpture, not the words, not the ugliness. The fact that for once Calvin couldn't charm the room into taking his side. He stormed back up the driveway toward the house, phone already in his hand. I watched him go with the calm posture of someone observing weather. Edith stepped up beside me. That, she whispered, is the ugliest handshake I have ever seen in my life. Thank you, I whispered back. Edith's mouth twitched. He's going to try to sue you. Let him, I said. She looked at me, thoughtful. Did you check for easements? I met her eyes. Oh, Edith. Her brows rose. You did? I checked for recorded easements, I said softly. None? Edith nodded once. Good. And I checked for prescriptive access claims, I added. He'd have to prove continuous, hostile, open use over the statutory period and… Edith held up a hand. Sweetheart, I don't know what any of that means. I just know you came prepared. I smiled. I did. The workers drilled into the frozen earth. The sculpture's base settled into place. The bright words gleamed against the gray day like a taunt. By noon, it was standing. By 12:30, it had become the new focal point of Maple Road. Cars slowed. A neighbor walking a dog stopped and stared. The dog stared too, confused, like it could sense the sculpture's unnatural energy. By 1, Calvin's blinds were shut, and by 2, he came out again, this time with the kind of determination that only appears when someone has been humiliated in their own yard. He walked straight to me like he'd rehearsed it. His expression was controlled. His voice was smooth. We need to talk. I smiled warmly. Of course. He glanced around at the workers finishing up, then leaned in. This isn't over. I nodded sympathetically. I didn't think it was. He flinched at that, then steadied himself. I spoke to my attorney. He says you can't deny access to the property. I kept my tone gentle. He's welcome to say that. I'm not denying access. Calvin's eyes narrowed. That thing is in the way. It's on my land, I said, and the driveway your land, he snapped, losing the smoothness. So yes, you're denying access. I blinked slowly as if I were processing. Calvin, you've been crossing property you didn't own for years without checking. His face twisted. You're doing this to punish me for inheriting the house. I sighed softly, like this was exhausting. I'm doing this because I bought land and I'm using it. You always say you're responsible. This is responsibility. He leaned in, voice sharp. What do you want? That was the real question, the one Calvin hated asking, because asking meant admitting I had leverage. I smiled like I was about to offer him soup. I want you to have what Mom left you, I said softly. And I want you to enjoy it. His eyes flicked to the sculpture, then back. Enjoy this? It's cheerful, I said. Family is everything. His jaw clenched so hard I thought he might crack a tooth, I continued, gentle. But I understand. The driveway is inconvenient. He stared at me, breathing hard through his nose like a bull in a suit. So, I said, I spoke to my attorney too. There are options. His eyes narrowed. Options. Yes, I said, as if I were offering menu items. 1. You can create a new driveway entirely on your land. It would require moving the entrance about 15 feet to the right, cutting through a small section of the maples. Calvin's face twitched. Those maples were his bragging rights. His legacy. 2, I continued, you can request a formal easement from me. A recorded one. Clear terms. Clear boundaries. Clear maintenance responsibilities. His eyes sharpened. And, I said softly, easements aren't free. Calvin froze. There it was. The pivot, fully realized. The moment he understood what he'd done and what I had done in response, he could keep the house, but he couldn't fully use it without me. His voice went dangerously quiet. You're extorting me. I smiled gently. No, I'm negotiating. Legally. His mouth opened, then shut. He looked past me, at the sculpture, at the road, at the workers packing up, at Edith watching like she was at the theater. Then he did something I'd never seen him do. He swallowed his pride. How much? He said through clenched teeth. I softened my eyes, kind as ever. I don't know yet, I said. We'll let the attorneys work out a fair market rate for access based on impact and property value. Calvin's face turned the color of a bad sunset. "You planned all of this?" he whispered. I tilted my head, voice calm. "Calvin, you planned the part where you kicked me out." His eyes flashed with rage, but there was nowhere for it to go. He couldn't scream without making himself the villain in front of the neighbors. He couldn't hit me because that would end his life as he knew it. He couldn't even slam a door properly because half the doors in the house now required a special touch, so he did the only thing he could. He retreated. He turned and walked back up the driveway, shoulders tight, steps stiff, like each one was an admission. I watched him go, then turned to Edith. "He'll try to bully me through lawyers." Edith shrugged. "Let him. Lawyers cost money." I smiled. Exactly. That night, Calvin texted me 3 words. I responded with 1. The next day, I met him at a coffee shop in town. Neutral ground, public, Calvin's preferred battlefield because he liked witnesses. He sat in a corner booth, already there, already vibrating with contained anger. His coffee sat untouched. I arrived with a small folder in my bag, documents, maps, printouts. Not weapons, just paper. Calvin stood as I approached, like he was trying to reclaim height. "Sit," he said. I slid in across from him. "Hi, Calvin." "Don't," he said. "Don't do the sweet voice. I know what you're doing." I kept my tone even. "Okay." His eyes narrowed because he didn't like that either. He wanted me emotional. He wanted me defensive. He wanted me to give him something he could point to and call unreasonable. Instead, I sat calmly, hands folded, like a woman discussing a leaky roof. "What do you want?" he repeated. I took a breath. "I want fairness." He laughed, sharp. "Fairness. You walked away with half the cash." "That's not what I'm talking about," I said softly. "You took Mom's home, the place I cared for, the place I lived in. You asked me to leave it like it meant nothing." Calvin leaned forward. "It's a house, Mara. Grow up." And that, oddly, made me feel lighter, because it reminded me exactly who he was. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. "Then it's just a strip of land. You grow up." His eyes flared. He opened his mouth, then stopped, because he could hear it too, the perfect mirror. I continued, steady. "Here's what's going to happen. You can build a new driveway, or you can buy an easement, or you can sell me the strip," he interrupted, voice hard. I smiled gently. "No?" Calvin's fingers curled around his coffee cup. "Why not?" "Because I'm using it," I said simply. He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "You're ruining my life over this," he hissed. I blinked. "No, I'm inconveniencing you." He slammed his hand on the table, not hard enough to spill anything but hard enough to make a point. Heads turned. A barista glanced over. Calvin immediately softened, forced a laugh like it was a joke, and lowered his voice. "I can make you regret this," he said. I nodded. "You can try." His eyes darted to my folder. "What's that?" "Information," I said calmly. "About the easement process, terms, options." Calvin swallowed. "What terms?" I slid 1 page across to him. Not a contract, just bullet points, like a helpful guide. Defined width for driveway access across my parcel maintenance responsibility, snow removal, grading, repairs. On you, insurance liability coverage, naming me as additional insured annual. Fee, market-based, or one-time lump sum payment, term length, renewable, noise/visual mitigation. You will not challenge or interfere with my installation. Calvin read it, eyes scanning, then froze on the last line. "You're keeping the statue," he said, voice flat. I smiled warmly. "It's art." He looked up slowly. "You're insane." I tilted my head. "I'm just responsible." His jaw worked like he wanted to spit the word back at me. Then he leaned in, voice low, dangerous. "And the house. What did you do to the house?" I blinked, innocent. "I renovated." "The lights," he hissed. "The doors. The thermostat. The everything." I softened my expression, pure concern. "Calvin, I left you instructions." He stared at me like he wanted to crawl across the table. "And the smell," he said suddenly, as if he'd been holding it in. "What is that smell?" I kept my face calm. "Smell?" He looked almost feral. "There's a smell, in the living room. It comes and goes. It's—" He swallowed, furious at having to describe it. "It's like low tide, like something rotting." "Ah, the smell. This was the part you wanted, shrimp in curtain rods, that delayed, impossible to find horror. But I hadn't done that, because Calvin could call the police for that, and because my revenge needed to survive daylight." I leaned forward, lowering my voice like I was sharing a secret. "Calvin," I said gently, "it's an old house." His eyes narrowed. "Don't. Humidity gets into things," I continued, calm and helpful. "Old fabric, old insulation, old wood." He clenched his jaw. "It started after you left." I shrugged slightly. "Maybe it was already there and you're noticing now because you're stressed." His face contorted. "I had pest control out. They didn't find anything." "Then it's probably not pests," I said softly. "Did you check the crawl space? Sometimes moisture—" He cut me off. "Stop." I paused, looking at him with gentle patience. Then, kindly, I said, "Calvin, I didn't hide anything in your house." His eyes searched mine for the lie, and the truth was, he couldn't catch me. Because I wasn't lying. The smell wasn't shrimp. It was fish emulsion fertilizer, a completely legal, completely normal gardening product my mother had used for years on her tomatoes. When I moved out, I'd moved most things, but I'd left a single unopened jug in the shed because it technically belonged to the house's garden supplies, and I'd wanted to keep my parting gift theme consistent. Fish emulsion doesn't smell much when it's sealed, but seals fail, caps loosen, plastic warps in temperature swings, and a slow leak onto cold concrete can create a smell that blooms later when it warms and disappears again when the cold returns. No vandalism, no crime, just nature. Calvin stared at me, trembling with frustration. "Then why does it smell like death?" I softened. "I'm sorry you're dealing with that." He looked like he might actually scream. And then, because Calvin always took the path that allowed him to stay the hero, he forced himself back, into control. He leaned back, inhaled slowly, and said, through tight lips, "Fine, forget the house. We'll do your easement." I nodded, helpful. "Great." His eyes cut into me. "And you'll transfer all the smart home accounts permanently to me. No more surprises." "Of course," I said warmly. "I'll do it properly." He stared. "And you'll stop." I tilted my head. "Stop what?" He held my gaze. "Stop trying to punish me." I let my expression go soft, almost sad. "Calvin," I said quietly, "I'm not punishing you. I'm simply not making it easy." That landed, because it was the one thing he couldn't accuse me of being without sounding like he believed he deserved ease. He stood abruptly, tossed cash on the table, and stormed out. I sat for a moment longer, sipping my coffee, calm as ever. Outside, snow started to fall again, soft, steady, inevitable. And at Maple Grove, Calvin had a house full of helpful upgrades, a driveway with a problem, and a giant shining reminder that family is everything, whether you behave like it or not. Calvin didn't text me for 3 days after the coffee shop. That's how I knew the lawyers had entered the chat. When Calvin was in control, he was loud. When he wasn't, he went quiet and let professionals carry the knives so his hands stayed clean. On the 4th day, an envelope arrived at my apartment. Thick paper, official lettering, the kind of mail that makes your stomach tighten before you've even opened it. Calvin's attorney. A firm with a name that sounded like an old building. Inside was a letter that tried very hard to sound polite while implying I was a problem that needed to be solved. It said things like, "And my favorite," tucked in like a threat wearing a cardigan. They were talking about the statue. They called it a structure, as if naming it differently made it less hilarious. I read the letter twice, then placed it neatly into my own folder of neatly arranged papers. Then I did what people like Calvin never expected. I called my attorney first. Not because I wanted a war, because I wanted a record. 2 days later, We met in a small conference room that smelled like coffee and toner. My attorney, Nina Patel, had calm eyes and a voice that didn't rise for anyone. Calvin arrived with his lawyer and his posture. The same straight-backed, controlled stance he used in boardrooms. He didn't look at me the way siblings look at each other. He looked at me like I was a negotiation. "Hi, Calvin," I said warmly, because kindness is a shield that forces your enemy to reveal themselves. He gave a tight nod. "Mara?" We sat, lawyers arranged papers. Nina glanced at me once, a subtle check-in. Calvin's attorney started. "We'd like to resolve this quickly." "I agree," Nina replied. Calvin's attorney smiled. "Our client has enjoyed uninterrupted access to the property for decades. The driveway entrance, it crosses my client's parcel," Nina said smoothly, "with no recorded easement." Calvin's attorney blinked, a tiny pause. "We're aware." "Great," Nina said. "Then we're in agreement on the facts." Calvin shifted in his chair, irritated. He didn't like facts when they didn't serve him. His attorney continued, "We're proposing a reasonable easement that allows our client continued use of the driveway as it has existed historically." Nina nodded. "We're open to an easement." Calvin's shoulders loosened slightly. Relief. He thought this was the part where his authority returned. Then Nina slid a single page forward. A draft. Not a final contract, just a proposed framework. Terms, boundaries, responsibilities. Calvin's attorney read, eyebrows rising slowly. Calvin leaned in, impatient. "What's it say?" His attorney didn't look up. "It says, you're responsible for maintaining the driveway surface, including snow removal, grading, and repairs." Calvin frowned. Obviously. His attorney kept reading. "It says you'll carry liability insurance naming Mara as additional insured." Calvin scoffed. "Fine." "It says," his attorney continued, voice tightening, "you cannot alter or expand the driveway footprint without written permission." Calvin's mouth opened to argue, then shut. That one mattered. "And," his attorney said carefully, "it says the easement fee is—" Calvin snatched the page and read the number. His face changed. Not outrage yet, something colder, like he'd just discovered an insult carved into stone. "That's insane," he said. Nina's voice stayed calm. "It's based on valuation models for encumbered land use, impact on property, and the fact that this is the only current access point." Calvin laughed sharply. "You're charging me for my own driveway." I smiled softly, sympathetic. "You're paying for access across my property. That's what an easement is." Calvin's eyes snapped to mine. "This is extortion." Nina didn't blink. "No, it's a negotiation. You are free to build a new driveway entirely on your parcel." Calvin's jaw clenched. "That would cost more." Nina nodded as if she'd expected that. "Then the easement is the cheaper option." Calvin stared at the page like he could burn the numbers down with anger. His attorney cleared his throat. "We also need to address the structure." "The sculpture," Nina corrected, pleasant. Calvin's attorney forced a smile. "Yes, the sculpture. Its placement creates a safety concern for vehicles entering the driveway." Nina slid another document forward. "The sculpture is fully within Mara's parcel boundaries and fully compliant with the permitted site plan. We also have a letter from the contractor confirming it does not physically obstruct the driveway surface." Calvin leaned forward, voice sharp. "But it's right there." I kept my tone warm. "It's welcoming," his attorney pressed. "It's also visually distracting." I nodded sympathetically. "That's what art does." Calvin made a sound of disgust. Nina remained calm. "If Calvin would like additional clearance, he can construct a new driveway entrance." Calvin's eyes widened. "You're not moving it." I smiled gently. "It's bolted to a foundation." Calvin stared at me, breathing hard. And then, because he still believed he could win with pressure, he pivoted to a different tactic. He leaned back, laced his fingers together, and said in that low, careful voice he used when he wanted to sound wise, "Mara, Mom would hate this." I let my face soften into something sad. "Calvin," I said quietly, "Mom would hate what you did." The room went still. His attorney looked down at his notes like suddenly they were fascinating. Calvin's eyes flashed. He opened his mouth, but Nina spoke first. "We're happy to continue discussions," she said, "but my client's terms are reasonable and lawful." Calvin's attorney coughed. "We might need to revisit the fee." Nina smiled. "Of course, take a week." Calvin stood so abruptly his chair legs squeaked. He didn't offer me a look. He didn't offer me a nod. He walked out like a man leaving a meeting he hadn't won. And for the first time in my life, I watched Calvin exit a room without controlling the story. A week passed, then another. Calvin didn't sign. Instead, he tried a different route. One morning, I received a notice from the town. I read it and laughed. Actually laughed, because it was so Calvin. If he couldn't win with money, he'd try to win by making the system do his dirty work. He wanted the town to be the bad guy. He wanted to point at and say, "My hands are tied." The problem was my hands weren't tied either. The permit was real. The inspection had passed. The foundation was poured according to plan. So when the inspector arrived, a tired man in a heavy coat with a clipboard, I met him at the road with a smile and a thermos of coffee. "Morning," I said. He looked surprised. "You're the owner of this parcel?" "Yes," I said, bright. "I'm Mara." He glanced at the statue, then back at me. "Got a complaint." "I figured," I said gently. "Would you like the permit paperwork?" His eyebrows lifted. "You've got it?" I pulled a folder from my bag, neat as a gift. Printed and organized. He blinked slowly, like his day had just gotten easier and he didn't know how to feel about it. We walked through the documents. He checked measurements. He checked setbacks. He checked the base. He sighed. "This is permitted." "Yes," I said pleasantly. He shifted his weight, awkward. "It's something." "I know," I said warmly. "It's very meaningful to me." He looked like he wanted to ask why, but he knew better than to invite emotions into a zoning conversation. He scribbled on his clipboard, "You're fine, nothing to cite." "Thank you," I said, sincere. As he left, he paused, glanced at the driveway, and said quietly, "If someone's complaining about a statue that's permitted, there's probably something else going on." I smiled softly. "Family," I said. He nodded once, like that explained everything, and drove away. That afternoon, Calvin called. His voice was smooth again, but it was a smoothness that sounded forced, like someone holding a smile with sore muscles. "Hey," he said. "Hi," I replied warmly. "I heard the town came by." "Yes," I said. "They said everything is in order." Silence. Then Calvin's voice tightened. "You know this is making you look petty." I let a beat pass. "Does it?" "People are talking," he said. "Neighbors." I smiled, voice light. "They're talking about a statue. They'll survive." Calvin exhaled hard. "It's humiliating." There it was, not inconvenient, not unsafe. Humiliating because Calvin didn't care how it functioned. He cared how it looked. I softened my tone. "I'm sorry you feel that way." He made a sharp noise. "Stop talking like a therapist." I stayed calm. "What do you want, Calvin?" A pause, then quieter. "I want my driveway back." "You never had it," I said gently. "You just never checked." His voice turned sharp again. "Fine. How much to buy the strip?" I didn't hesitate. "It's not for sale." He laughed, harsh. "Everything's for sale," I smiled. "Not everything." He inhaled like he was about to yell, then swallowed it down, because yelling wasn't working. "What if I offer double?" he said, voice tight. "Triple?" "Still no," I replied, pleasant. "You're enjoying this," he hissed. I kept my voice warm. "No, I'm protecting myself." Calvin went silent for a long moment. Then he said, low and flat, "You're going to regret this." And he hung up. That night, I got a text from Aunt Denise. I stared at the message for a full minute. This was Calvin's next move, turning family into a jury. He wanted witnesses. He wanted sympathy. He wanted to tell a story where he was the responsible brother and I was the unstable sister. So I responded the only way that keeps you safe in a family war, with politeness and facts. Denise didn't reply. But the next day, Cousin Mark called. "Mara," he said quietly, "are you okay?" I could hear it. Hesitation. Uncertainty. Calvin had been working him. "I'm okay," I said warmly. "Are you calling because Calvin asked you to?" Mark exhaled. "He said you did something to the house?" I smiled slightly. "I renovated. Legally." Mark hesitated. "He says the lights don't work unless the dishwasher runs." "I installed smart home features," I said, calm. "If he doesn't like the settings, he can reset them to factory defaults." Mark paused. "Can he?" "Yes," I said. "It's in the instructions." Mark went quiet, then said, "He didn't read them." I laughed softly. "No," Mark sighed. "So, the statue, that's yours." "Yes," I said. Mark sounded almost impressed. "It's intense. It's art," I said gently. Mark hesitated. "Did Mom want this?" The question hit a tender spot. I swallowed. "Mom wanted the house loved," I said softly. "She wanted it treated like a home, not a trophy." Mark was quiet for a moment, then said, "Calvin's treating it like a trophy." "Yes," I agreed. Mark exhaled. "I'm not taking sides," he said, but his voice had shifted, less uncertain now. "I just wanted to make sure you weren't doing anything illegal." "I'm not," I said calmly. "That's the point." Mark paused. "Okay." He didn't say good luck because in our family, we didn't say things like that out loud, but when we hung up, I felt something loosen in my chest. Calvin could spin stories, but facts were stubborn, and I had them. A week later, Calvin finally caved. Not in a dramatic way, in a way that revealed exactly who he was. He sent a short email through his attorney. They offered a counter. Lower. Still fair. Nina and I reviewed it. We adjusted some language. We tightened some boundaries. We ensured the insurance clause was rock solid. And then, because I didn't want Calvin's chaos in my life forever, I agreed. We signed. It was clean. Legal. Recorded. Calvin got driveway access. I got a yearly payment that would fund my own future. And the sculpture stayed, because I refused to let him erase the reminder that actions have consequences. The first time Calvin drove through after the easement was recorded, he slowed at the road and paused in front of the statue like it might lunge at his car. Then he turned in, carefully, because the entrance was tight now. Not physically tight, just psychologically. The statue made it feel like you were being watched. He hated it, which meant it worked. And Maple Grove? Maple Grove kept being inconvenient, not unsafe, not broken, just a house full of features that required humility. The self-closing cabinets trained him to wait. The bathroom door trained him to lift as he turned. The touchless faucet trained him to move slower. The smart lights trained him to read instructions. And the faint, shifting scent of fish fertilizer in cold weather trained him to stop pretending old things behave like new ones just because you want them to. Calvin tried everything short of admitting defeat. He bought air purifiers. He blamed the neighbors. He called pest control again. He replaced curtains. He repainted. He scrubbed floors until his knuckles cracked, and the house stayed itself. Not ruined, just unwilling to cooperate with someone who didn't respect it. One afternoon, months later, I drove past Maple Grove on my way to Edith's. The statue gleamed in the sun, its cheerful words throwing bright shadows on the snowmelt. Family is everything. Calvin was outside, actually shoveling snow off the driveway. He looked up as my car passed. For a moment, our eyes met. His face held something I didn't expect. Not rage, not triumph. Something like exhaustion. Like he'd spent so long chasing power that he didn't recognize how heavy it was when you finally got it. I didn't stop the car. I didn't wave. I didn't smirk. I just drove on. Calm and quiet, letting him sit in the life he'd fought for. Because that was the best part of lawful revenge. You don't have to gloat. You just have to let them live in the world they created. After the easement was recorded, Calvin behaved the way men like Calvin always behave when they don't get to cleanly. He tried to act like he'd chosen this. He told Aunt Denise the easement was just paperwork, and the statue was quirky, and the smart home issues were glitches he'd already resolved. He said it with the same bright tone people use when they're holding a crack in a glass with their thumb and pretending it's fine. Meanwhile, Maple Grove kept doing what Maple Grove did. It sat there, quiet and old and stubborn, refusing to become an obedient trophy. I didn't have to do anything else. That was the part Calvin never understood. My revenge didn't require constant effort. It was a one-time pivot, a legal adjustment of the board. After that, he was the one who had to keep moving pieces just to survive. For the first month, he tried to conquer the house through willpower. He woke up earlier than usual, determined to get ahead of it. He stomped around in those expensive boots, flipping switches like he was going to intimidate electricity. He talked to the house the way he talked to service workers, like the right tone could make it obey. "Okay," I heard him say once when I stopped by to pick up a box of my mother's old photo albums I'd forgotten. "We're not doing this today." The kitchen overhead light flickered on. 3 seconds late. Calvin stared at it, chest rising and falling, like the bulb had insulted him. "See?" I said softly, sweet. "It's working." He whipped his head toward me. "Don't." I kept my face kind. "I'm not doing anything." "You did something," he muttered. "I renovated," I reminded him gently. "Legally." He looked away, jaw tight. The words always irritated Calvin because legality was what stopped him from simply taking what he wanted and calling it fair. He tried the next tactic, outsourcing. He hired a smart home technician. A nice man named Trevor with a calm voice and a tool bag full of little devices that beeped like birds. Trevor walked through Maple Grove the way you walk through someone else's mood, cautiously. Calvin followed him like a shadow, arms crossed, offering helpful commentary. "I'm telling you," Calvin insisted, "the lights are tied to the dishwasher." Trevor nodded politely. "Smart automations can link devices, yeah." "It's ridiculous," Calvin said. Trevor glanced at me because I'd been invited, summoned, really, under the guise of family meeting. Calvin wanted witnesses. He always wanted witnesses when he thought he might finally prove I'd wronged him. I smiled warmly at Trevor. "It's a pretty standard energy monitoring routine," I said. Calvin's head snapped toward me. "You admit it." "I never denied it," I replied gently. "It's in the folder," Trevor asked. "You have documentation?" I handed him the folder I'd left months ago, the one labeled in tidy block letters, Smart Home Info. Trevor flipped through it and nodded slowly. "This is actually thorough." Calvin made a bitter sound. "Yeah, she's thorough." Trevor tapped a page. "Okay, here's the issue. You've got overlapping routines. One triggers on dishwasher power draw, another triggers on time of day, and this one," he pointed, "is a manual override that requires a double toggle. It's not unsafe, it's just annoying." Calvin's eyes widened. "Remove it." Trevor nodded. "Sure, but what?" Calvin snapped. Trevor hesitated, choosing his words. "If you remove it, you might lose some of the energy saver functions." Calvin threw up his hands. "I don't care about energy saver, I care about my lights working." Trevor glanced at me again. I gave a small, sympathetic shrug. Calvin always wanted modern convenience until it required modern humility. Trevor began changing settings. He deleted routines, merged others, simplified names. He removed the please from the living room lamp command. He set the motion sensors to ignore anything smaller than a human. Calvin watched, visibly relaxing as his world became more predictable. By the end, the lights behaved, the faucet behaved, the thermostat stopped dipping at 217. Calvin exhaled like he'd won a battle, and for a moment, just a moment, I considered feeling guilty. Then Trevor said casually, "You're gonna want to keep the hub firmware updated, and you should probably read through the folder yourself. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing." Calvin's face tightened again, because the victory had come from paying someone to understand what I'd done, which meant the victory wasn't his. Trevor left. Calvin turned to me, trying to regain control with tone. "There," he said. "Fixed." I smiled warmly. Great. I'm glad. He narrowed his eyes. So you're done? I blinked. Done with what? This, he said, gesturing at the house like it was a war zone. This petty stuff. I let my face soften. Calvin, I haven't done anything since I moved out. He stared at me, furious because he couldn't prove otherwise, and that was the point. His discomfort wasn't caused by him. It was caused by him living in a home he took without earning the love that used to live there. That's the thing about certain places. You can own them legally and still feel unwelcome. The statue took longer to become background. Calvin tried to pretend it was quirky for exactly 2 weeks. He made jokes about it at dinner parties like he was in on the humor. Oh, that thing, he'd say, waving toward the road. My sister's creative. His friends would laugh politely while their eyes stayed glued to the glossy handshake and the 2 bright words. Family is everything. The longer you looked at it, the more it felt like a threat. Then a realtor friend of his came by one evening. I know because Edith called me, voice buzzing. He's got someone there, Edith whispered. A woman in heels. She keeps staring at the handshake like it's going to talk. I smiled into my phone. Interesting. He's walking her around like a show pony, Edith said. And the funny part? He keeps stopping at the driveway entrance and angling his body so he blocks her view of the statue. That's considerate, I murmured. Edith snorted. It's desperate. I didn't have to be psychic to understand what Calvin was doing. He was already thinking about escape, because Calvin's relationship with property had never been love. It was possession, and possession stops feeling good when it starts possessing you back. The first time he tried to take back the narrative, he hosted a big gathering, an open house-style party to celebrate Mom's legacy. It was a performance, string lights on the porch, catered food, carefully chosen music. He invited neighbors he'd never met. He invited family. He invited people with influence. He wanted them to walk through Maple Grove and see him as the rightful heir. I went because refusing would have looked like bitterness, and Calvin would have loved that. I showed up with a bottle of wine and a soft smile. Calvin greeted me at the door with a bright, fake warmth that didn't reach his eyes. You came. Of course, I said sweetly. It's family. His jaw tightened at the word, but he stepped aside and let me in. People wandered the house, complimenting the floors, the paint, the furniture Calvin had replaced my mother's softness with. He stood in the living room and told stories that made him sound like the devoted son. Mom and I used to sit right here, he told a neighbor, gesturing at a chair that had not been in the room when Mom was alive. She'd tell me all her worries. I promised her I'd keep this place safe. I listened quietly, sipping wine. I smiled at the right moments. Aunt Denise fluttered around like a moth, collecting gossip. Cousin Mark hovered by the snacks, looking uncomfortable. And then, inevitably, someone mentioned the statue. A woman in a tan coat leaned in conspiratorially. So, what's with the handshake thing at the road? Calvin laughed too loudly. Oh, that art? Art, she repeated, skeptical. Calvin waved a dismissive hand. My sister, she's got a sense of humor. The woman looked around, spotted me across the room, and, because people love the person behind the drama, walked right over. You're the artist? She asked. I smiled warmly. Oh no, I just commissioned it. Her eyes widened. Commissioned, on purpose. Calvin moved behind her, trying to steer the conversation away like a man herding cattle. Mara, don't... I kept smiling. It's on my land, I said, sweet. It makes me happy. The woman blinked. You own that little strip? Yes, I said politely. I bought it. Calvin's hand landed on the woman's shoulder, a gentle pressure. Okay, enough, let's... But the woman was fascinated now. Why would you buy that? I tilted my head like it was the most normal thing in the world. Edith didn't want to keep paying taxes on land she wasn't using. I didn't want her taken advantage of. The woman looked past the window toward the road, then back to Calvin. Calvin smiled, but it looked like his face hurt. Someone else drifted over, overhearing. Wait, you have to pay your sister to use your own driveway? Calvin's laugh came out sharp. It's not like that. I kept my tone gentle. It's exactly like that, actually. It's an easement. The little group went quiet. Calvin's eyes flashed at me, furious. I smiled at him, warm and calm, because I wasn't humiliating him. I was simply not lying for him anymore. Later that night, when the party ended and the last guests left, Calvin cornered me in the kitchen. His voice was low, shaking. "You did that on purpose." I looked at him with mild surprise. "Did what?" "You made me look like a thief," he hissed. I kept my voice soft. "Calvin, you the one who took the house." His face twisted. "Mom gave it to me." "You maneuvered," I said gently, and watched his eyes flinch at the word because it was too accurate. "And you made me leave." He leaned in, voice deadly quiet. "You're enjoying this." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I'm surviving it." He stared at me like he wanted to find a crack in my calm. When he couldn't, he tried the last weapon he had. He pointed down the hallway toward the living room. "You think this is what she'd want? This ugliness? This feud?" The question hit. Because grief always hits even when you're prepared, but I didn't let it show. I took a breath and said quietly, "She'd want you to be decent." Calvin's mouth tightened. "I am decent." I held his gaze. "Then stop trying to win and start trying to live." He looked like he might hit something. Instead, he did what he always did when he was losing. He walked away. Winter passed, then spring. The maples budded. The gravel driveway softened from gray to pale dust. My mother's old garden bed sat empty behind the house because Calvin didn't plant anything. He'd hired someone to mow, but mowing isn't love. One Sunday morning in April, Edith called me again. "You're going to want to hear this," she said. "What?" I asked, already smiling. "He's outside at the road," Edith whispered. "With a measuring tape." I laughed softly. "No?" "Yes," Edith said, delighted. "He's measuring. He keeps walking back and forth like he's trying to see if there's a way to slide the driveway around your statue." I closed my eyes, picturing it. Calvin, ruler in hand, trying to outmath a boundary line. "What's he going to do?" I asked. Edith's voice went gleeful. "I think he's going to try to build a new entrance." That made sense. It was the only way he could regain control without paying me forever. But a new entrance meant cutting through the maples, my mother's maples, which meant Calvin was about to destroy the one thing he'd been bragging about, preserving. 2 weeks later, I got the email. Calvin had applied for a driveway permit adjustment. He didn't call me. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He just tried to bulldoze around the problem because bulldozing was his love language. On a bright Wednesday morning, the tree service arrived. Calvin stood with a clipboard, pointing, directing, acting like the foreman of his own destiny. And then the first chainsaw started. I was watching from Edith's porch with her, both of us quiet. The sound cut through the air like a scream. Calvin's shoulders didn't flinch. He kept pointing, kept talking, kept managing. But when the first maple limb fell, when it hit the ground with a heavy thud, Calvin paused. Just a second. Barely noticeable. He stared at the fallen limb like he'd recognized something he hadn't expected to feel. "Loss." Edith leaned toward me. "He's cutting your mother's trees," I swallowed. "Yes." Edith's eyes narrowed. "You going to stop him?" I shook my head slowly. "No." "Why not?" she whispered. "Because I didn't need to." That's what I wanted to say. Instead, I said softly, "Because it's his house." Edith studied me. "And that's the punishment?" I didn't answer. Calvin cut the maples back. Not all of them. Just enough to create a new entrance entirely on his parcel. It took money. It took permits. It took time. It took the one thing Calvin hated spending. Effort. And at the end, he finally had what he wanted. A driveway he didn't have to pay me to cross. He told everyone it was for safety. He said the old entrance was poorly designed. He claimed it was part of his renovation vision. But the truth sat there in plain sight. He had built a new driveway to escape a 3-foot strip of land he couldn't control. The old driveway entrance remained, still crossing my parcel, but now it was useless. just a remnant, like an old habit, and the statue remained too, towering over the original mouth of the drive like a monument to consequences. The day the new driveway opened, Calvin stood on his porch and watched the first car roll in, his own, making a wide, careful turn. He looked relieved. He also looked smaller. Because to get around me, he'd had to cut down part of my mother's legacy. He'd won access and lost the story. A month later, I visited Maple Grove for the first time in a while, not to fight, not to negotiate, to collect the last thing my mother had left for me there, a small wooden recipe box she'd kept above the fridge, stuffed with cards written in her looping handwriting. Calvin met me at the door with a stiff nod. "You're here," he said. "Yes," I replied warmly. "Just getting Mom's recipe box." His eyes flicked toward the kitchen, then back. "Fine." I walked in slowly, letting the familiar smells hit me. The house looked different. New couch, new curtains, new art on the walls. But beneath it, the old creaks remained. The old heartbeat remained. Calvin hovered. "Are you satisfied now?" The question surprised me. Not because he asked it, but because his voice didn't carry the usual arrogance. It sounded tired, almost honest. I opened the cabinet above the fridge, reached up and pulled down the recipe box carefully. "Satisfied?" I echoed. He shrugged, looking away. "With whatever this is, the statue, the land, the humiliation." I held the box against my chest. "Calvin," I said softly, "I didn't do this to humiliate you." He let out a sharp breath. "Sure, I did it," I continued calm, "because you treated me like I didn't matter, like my life in this house didn't count." Calvin's jaw tightened. "You could have fought the will." "I could have," I agreed, "but that would have turned Mom into a battlefield." He stared at the floor. "So instead," I said gently, "I let you have what you wanted." Calvin looked up, eyes hard. "And you punished me." I shook my head slowly. "No, I just made sure it came with the truth attached." His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, like he was trying to process a concept he'd never had to swallow before. "The truth," he repeated, bitter. "Yes," I said softly, "that you can't take a home and call it love." For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he said, quiet and flat, "Mom would have wanted us together." I looked at him, really looked, not the performance, not the suit, not the brother I'd trained myself to survive, a man standing in a house he'd won, still sounding like he wasn't sure where to put his hands. "Maybe," I said gently. He swallowed. "So what now?" I smiled, warm. "Now I go home." He frowned like the word irritated him. "Your apartment." "My home," I corrected softly. He looked at me as if the correction stung. Then he nodded once, stiff. I walked out with the recipe box and didn't glance back. Outside, the spring air smelled like cut grass and new leaves. At the road, the statue gleamed, unapologetic, ridiculous, permanent. Family is everything. I drove to the cemetery after that. I sat by my mother's stone with the recipe box on my lap and told her quietly what I'd done and what I hadn't done. "I kept it legal," I whispered. "I kept it clean. I didn't hurt the house. I didn't break anything." The wind moved through the trees above her grave, soft as breath. "I miss you," I said, "and I'm sorry he turned you into a prize." I rested my hand on the recipe box and closed my eyes, and for the first time since the will reading, I felt something like peace settle into my chest, not because Calvin had suffered, but because I had stopped letting him rewrite my worth. That summer, I used the money from the easement, those first payments before the new driveway made them unnecessary, to put a down payment on a small place of my own. Nothing grand, a little house with a narrow porch and a patch of dirt out back. I planted basil. It came up bright and stubborn, green against the soil, and every time I brushed a leaf between my fingers and smelled that sharp, sweet perfume, I remembered something important. A home isn't what someone leaves you in a will. A home is what you build when you refuse to be erased. and somewhere down Maple Road, Calvin lived inside Maple Grove. Inside all his new furniture and his missing maples and his carefully managed story. He had the house. I had my name. And at the edge of the road, where the old driveway met the world, a hideous handshake kept shining like a joke the universe refused to stop telling. Because family is everything, especially when you finally learn what that really costs. If you made it to the end of this story, because nothing says I'm proud of you like for more bedtime drama where karma comes with paperwork. And if you want the next story, bigger, darker, and even more satisfying, and so I know you're ready. He's something here. After God. Family is everything, ma'am. Crosses. We need to meet. Sure. Driveway. Access license/easement discussion. Points driveway. Access/easement discussion. We are confident an amicable resolution can be reached. Our client has relied on continued access for many years. Any obstruction of ingress and egress may create liability. We request the immediate removal of any structure that interferes with safe entry. First, complaint filed regarding unpermitted structure and potential nuisance. Officials Calvin says you're harassing him. Is everything okay? Everything is okay. I bought a small strip of land in front of the road. It's legal. The town inspected the installation and approved it. Calvin can either build a new driveway entrance on his parcel or we can sign an easement. I'm trying to keep things calm. Our client is willing to accept your proposed easement terms with adjustments to the fee. Win legally actively attacking our tap like legal revenge with clean hands. Subscribe, hit the bell, comment, spite strip.